A mother sits in a Victorian photography studio. 1850. She holds her infant daughter, dressed in white muslin with lace and blue ribbons. A coral necklace at the baby's throat. Pink and cream flowers clasped in tiny hands. The photographer adjusts his camera, tells the mother to remain still. The exposure will take time, maybe a minute, maybe longer. Don't move. Don't breathe too heavily. The mother stares down into empty space. Her eyes are expressionless, vacant. She's wrapped in a heavy black cape despite the season, and the baby in her arms, beautiful, perfectly dressed, surrounded by flowers, will never open her eyes. Because the child is dead? This photograph isn't a portrait of life. It's a portrait of death. Post-mortem photography, a practice that became extremely popular in Victorian England and America. For many families, especially poor families, this would be the only photograph ever taken of their child. The only image by which to remember them. This is the story of Victorian post-mortem photography, why it existed, how it worked, and what it reveals about a society that lived much closer to death than we can imagine. Step 1. The invention that made death visible. Let's start at the beginning. 1839. The daguerreotype is invented, making portraiture commonplace. For the first time in history, ordinary people can afford to capture images of themselves. Before photography, only the wealthy could commission painted portraits. The middle class now had a way to remember dead loved ones. The aristocracy had been doing this for centuries with painted memorial portraits. Now, everyone could participate. With the advent of photography, photographing the dead immediately became a mourning ritual for Victorians. Post-mortem photographers even had a slogan, "Secure the shadow, ere the substance fades." It's a haunting phrase, the shadow, the photographic image, the substance, the physical body. Capture the image before the body decays, before memory fades, before the person is truly, finally gone. Death photographs were called mirrors with memories. They were tangible proof that someone had existed, that they had mattered, that they had been loved. Step 2. Understanding Victorian death. To understand why Victorians photographed their dead, you need to understand how present death was in Victorian life. Death rates soared as a result of increased urbanization brought about by industrialization. If you lived in early Victorian England in the 1830s and 40s, you would have been lucky to make it to your late 30s. Disease was everywhere. Cholera, typhoid, tuberculosis. Infections that are easily treatable today were death sentences then. Child mortality was staggering. Families expected to lose children. It wasn't unusual, it was normal. Death often occurred in the home, the family often prepared the body for burial, and the process of death was an ordinary and common part of life. People didn't die in hospitals. They died in their bedrooms, in their living rooms, surrounded by family, and the family handled everything, washing the body, dressing it, laying it out for viewing. Death wasn't hidden away. It was intimate, expected, part of the rhythm of life. The Victorian emphasis was on a good death, ideally a peaceful and gentle transition into the afterlife, witnessed by family and friends. Being present for a loved one's death was a duty, a sacred responsibility. And after death, you needed something to remember them by. Step 3. The practical problem of memory. Here's the crucial detail. Many daguerreotype post-mortem portraits, especially those of infants and young children, were probably the only photographs ever made of the individuals portrayed. Photography was expensive, and most families didn't own cameras. Children had to hold still too long for parents to be willing to purchase expensive portraits when they were very young. Think about that. You have a baby. Photography costs money, significant money, and babies don't hold still. They wiggle, cry, move constantly. The long exposure times of early photography mean any movement creates blur. So you don't photograph your baby, you wait. You plan to do it when they're older, when they can sit still, when it's practical. And then, your baby dies. Suddenly you're desperate. You've never photographed your child. You have no image of them, and memory is unreliable. Faces fade, features blur. Within years you might struggle to remember exactly what your child looked like. When someone died and had never been photographed before, survivors were usually willing to pay any cost just to have a final memento of that person. Post-mortem photography solved this problem. The dead don't move. They're perfect subjects for long exposures. Victims tended to die much faster than in modern settings, where we prolong life with drugs and procedures, so the ravages of death, dehydration, and disease were often not as evident. If you acted quickly, within a day or two of death, you could photograph someone who looked peaceful, sleeping, almost alive. Step 4. How it was done. The process had conventions, standards, ways of posing the dead that made them look peaceful rather than disturbing. The most common pose was called the last sleep, where the deceased's eyes were closed, and they lay as though in repose. Dead children were often posed on a sofa, bed, or coffin, in a reclining position as in a peaceful sleep. In the Victorian era, it was common to photograph deceased young children or newborns in the arms of their mothers. The mother would hold her dead baby as if it were simply sleeping, sometimes dressed in christening gowns, sometimes surrounded by flowers. Live siblings were often photographed with their dead brother or sister, each holding their favorite dolls, toys, or pets. Children were asked to pose with their dead siblings, holding their hands, hugging them, or holding them around the shoulders. Some images, especially tintypes and ambrotypes, have a rosy tint added to the cheeks of the corpse, making them look healthier, more alive, less obviously dead. Later, as photography became more accessible, photographs showed the subject in a coffin, sometimes with a large group of funeral attendees. These became known as mourning tableaux. The living gathered around the dead for one final family portrait. The invention of the carte de visite allowed multiple prints to be made from a single negative, meaning copies could be mailed to relatives. Distant family members could receive a photograph of their loved one's funeral, a way to participate in grief from afar. Step 5. The myth that won't die. Now we need to address the internet, because if you search for Victorian post-mortem photography online, you'll find something that didn't actually happen: standing corpses. You'll see claims that Victorians propped dead people upright using special stands, that they posed corpses to look alive, standing, sitting in chairs, eyes open, positioned naturally. This is largely false. Posing stands were used to help living models hold still for longer exposures, not to prop up corpses. Contrary to myths on the internet, few deceased were propped up in standing positions to be photographed. Why? Because it's physically impractical. A dead body is heavy, uncooperative. Rigor mortis makes positioning difficult. The jaw falls open unnaturally. The eyes don't sit right. Experts who've studied Victorian photographer records and journals find no evidence of standing corpse photography as a common practice. Victorian photographers discussed posing corpses in deathbeds as popular, with families sometimes included in good death scenes displaying subtle grief. There were rare exceptions. Forensic photography for identifying unknown bodies sometimes used supports. But memorial photography, the kind families commissioned, those showed peaceful repose, not standing corpses. The standing corpse myth spread on the internet because it's dramatic, shocking, the kind of thing that gets shared, but it's not historically accurate. Step 6. The decline. Post-mortem photography declined in the 20th century with the development of personal cameras and increased affordability of photography. The advent of home snapshots decreased the desire for post-mortem photos, as most families would have many photographs taken in life. Once families could afford to photograph their children regularly, at birthdays, holidays, ordinary moments, the desperate need for a death photograph disappeared. By the mid-20th century, attitudes shifted. What had been a respected mourning tradition became seen as a macabre and morbid practice. Death moved from the home to hospitals, from public to private, from ordinary to traumatic. For us today, the idea of laying out a corpse, attending a wake, or seeing a dead body is traumatic. We just don't want to think about it. The Victorians had no choice. Death was everywhere, unavoidable. Photography was their way of holding on to what they'd lost. What it means. Post-mortem photography offered a memento mori, an object of reflection for the living, as well as a symbol of social status, because not everyone could afford them. But more than that, these photographs reveal a fundamentally different relationship with death. Victorians didn't hide death. They ritualized it, memorialized it, made space for grief in ways we've lost. We've gained something: longer lives, better medicine, lower mortality. We've lost something too, that intimate understanding of death, that acceptance that it's part of life, that willingness to look death in the face and say, "I will remember you." Victorian post-mortem photography seems morbid to us, but to them it was love, it was memory, it was refusing to let someone disappear completely. The final image. So here's what happened. Photography was invented. Death was everywhere. Families needed a way to remember loved ones who died before they could be photographed in life. Post-mortem photography became the solution. For decades, it was normal, expected, a final act of love. Then medical advances came. Death rates dropped. Photography became affordable, and the practice faded into history. Those photographs remain, thousands of them. Mothers holding dead babies, children posed with deceased siblings, families gathered around coffins. They're not macabre, they're heartbreaking. They're evidence of grief so profound that families were willing to stage elaborate photographs just to have one final image. One last shadow before the substance faded completely. That's not morbid. That's human. That's love surviving death by any means necessary, even if it means photographing the dead